Welcome to GPA's webinar today, 2023 GPA Compensation and Benefits Survey Overview, being presented today by Mike Chamberlain, the Chief Executive Officer of Grant Professionals Association.
Great. Thank you, Erin. And thank you all for coming today and being a part of this webinar. So one of the things that if you've attended this webinar in the past when we've talked about the annual salary survey, there's a couple things that I always like to make sure people are aware of as we go through this presentation and talk about the report, the salary data report. And primarily that is that throughout this presentation today and throughout the salary survey report, if you've downloaded it, you'll notice that there's two statistical terms used throughout the report. And that is mean, which is the mathematical average. So that's just taking the total number divided by the total number of responses to get the average. And then we also talk about the median. And the median is the middle number of all the reported data. And so what that means is that 50% of the reported data was above that level and 50% of it was below that level. And you'll see that really as we start getting into certain areas where there's some real differences between the mean and the median. So just a flashback to your statistics class for those of you who had got to enjoy that. Sorry, I have issues with statistics, but that's another story for another time. So let's jump in. So one of the things that we talk about is that we reach out to the audience of grant professionals to participate in this survey. And so one of the greatest areas of response that we get from is obviously from GPA members. So 71% of the participants in the 2023 salary survey were GPA members. But we also had 29% who were either former members or never been members of the association. So although that's a smaller group than what we've had represented in the past, it still helps us gather good data on the profession and where we are with regards to salary and benefits. In terms of certifications, so a small number of individuals that participated in the survey, about 11% hold the GPC. In terms of comparison to the GPA membership, that's an accurate reflection. About 10 to 11% of the GPA membership hold the GPC credential. So you'll notice that that pattern holds true for going forward as well. A small group also have the CFRE credential, and an even smaller group has the CGMS, which is the NGMA credential. So overall, 77% of the group report holding no credential whatsoever. Now let's get to some of the meat of this presentation in terms of who are the people that filled out the survey and what are the information and most common positions that are held as a result of the data collected in the survey. So you'll note that Director of Grants, Grant Manager and Grant Writers, and Consultants are the top four. Then we get into Grant Coordinators and Grant Specialists and Directors. We also collected information about some other titles, and you'll see that a little bit later on. But these are the top titles used by individuals who responded to the survey this year. A title's nice, but the reality is what do you do? What is the work that you do on a day in and day out basis? So and you'll obviously, these numbers don't add up to 100% because obviously as a grant professional or as an individual working for an organization, you do wear multiple hats, maybe even within the same hour of the day. But 83% of the respondents said that part of their job was writing grant proposals. So what we asked in the survey was what takes up at least 1/10 of your time. So you can see that we have writing grant proposals, researching grant opportunities, managing grants, and reporting. Coordinating projects then is the next largest, and finance and budget development kind of rounds out the top group of responsibilities and job duties, as it were. So when we look at that in terms of breaking it down kind of one more level, is to say, let's look at the mix of responsibilities that you have. So the mix of responsibilities shows that grant professionals spend a mean of 41% of their time writing grant proposals, 29% managing grants, and 31% on all other responsibilities. This breakdown has really remained consistent over the last 2 years. Now, when you get to the medians, the report shows much lower medians for managing grants and other responsibilities. So that suggests that the mean is distorted slightly by individuals, and probably the majority of individuals who have job responsibilities that are, or they're the individual who is responsible for the grants program for their entire organization. We know many of you are the only grants pro in your organization, so you wear those multiple hats of both researching and writing the grant proposals, doing all the pre-award work, then doing the post-award work of managing the grant funding and the reporting. And then in between time, working with program staff, your other folks in the development team, your executive directors, any number of folks in managing various projects. So it's a wide range of responsibilities. We also asked, how do you spend your time? So participants report writing a mean of 31 grant proposals over the past 12 months and managing a mean of 19. Their corresponding medians are much lower. So if you think, again, if you've got a large organization that's writing a lot of grant proposals, that's why we get the 31. But the median, meaning the middle of the pack, is at 19, and the median number of grants managed is 11. So average grants managed, again, was 24.9 and a median of 12. So as you can see, there's a correspondence there of grants written, grants managed equals about 1 a month. Consultants, on the other hand, reported a mean of 26.9 and a median of 6 clients. The mean is much higher than 2022 just because of the results of coming from some larger consulting companies this year. You'll note there in terms of grants funded, the average percent of funded proposals that were fully funded in the past 12 months was a mean of 60% and a median of 75%. As the former was driven down by some relatively low numbers reported. But the mean of 72% of funded proposals were fully funded and 14% were partially funded in the past 12 months. So that seems a little odd in terms of the results given that funded proposals should be fully or funded, but the partial funding seems to be more of a rarity these days. So hopefully what that means is what you're seeing is more fully funded grants rather than partially funded. So since 2022, the mean proportion of partially funded proposals decreased by 5% and the median decreased by 2%. But the grant proportion of total budgets decreased also by 3%. So looking at a funding mix for your organization, it looks like for most organizations, and that's that top line there under grants funded, it's fallen slightly in terms of the percentage of your total budget coming from grants. In terms of employment status and who are the people that responded to the survey, 81% of the survey participants are full-time employees, while 16% are consultants and 4% are part-time employees and 2% have another status. This represents a shift of 3 percentage points away from consultants toward full-time employees. And I know anecdotally a number of folks that have shifted back from consulting work back into full-time employment for any number of reasons. In terms of consulting, as far as where they are currently and future possibilities, among all survey participants, 31% report some involvement in current consulting. 13% are full-time, 12% part-time outside their full-time employment, and 6% are just full-time or part-time consultants without other employment. Interestingly enough, the do not consult and don't plan to and interested in consulting in the future numbers did not change from 2022. So those seem to be remaining fairly consistent in that regard. Before I move on, Aaron, were there any questions or any comments that I need to address at this point?
There was one that came out that said fewer partial funding could mean either more fully funded or denied. And then we did have 2 questions that just came through. Are these full-time grant professionals or a full-time development staff who also write grants?
I believe the way the question is asked is it's full-time grant professionals. But I'd have to dig into the data to find out for sure on that one.
Okay, and the other question was, is there a breakdown by age?
Yes, and we will see that in a little bit. And one of the things that I will note, and I'll mention this again later on, but one of the things that is in the full report is there's some great tables that go deeper into the data and give you a little bit closer snapshot by region, by size of organization, and by job title. So you'll want to, if you haven't already downloaded the full report, you'll definitely want to do that to get into some of those data tables to find out the exact data that matches up with your job and your job responsibilities. So let's move on into the actual compensation piece of this. So as we looked at the hourly pay rate or wage equivalent for employees, including part and full-time, it's a mean of $37.62 and a median of $35 per hour. So this represents only a small change in the mean and a $1.35 per hour increase in the median since 2021. So this figure is calculated each time using the wage response from exempt individuals paid by an hourly wage and dividing the annual salary by total hours worked during the year. We also include in this the hourly rate or the hourly billing rate for consultants. And so you can see the mean there is $91, just over $91, and the median is $80. So the mean continues a pattern of small recent decreases, while the median did increase $5 from 2022. So the overall percentage change reported in salary or wage for all respondents continued the remarkable recent trend in higher salaries, with a mean increase of 9% and a median increase of 4%. So it's a slight decrease in the mean increase and the same median reported in 2022. So although salaries increased from 2022 to 2023, the mean increase was a little bit slower than the prior year. So as with all of these surveys, this reflects pay increases for individuals in the same job, but also increased pay due to promotions or people changing employers. So average salary and average compensation. So last screen was more about hourly rates. This is total compensation. So participants reported an average current annual salary mean of 78,000, just over 78,000, and a median of 73,000. So again, this is where that mean versus median comes into play. So 50% of the respondents earned less than 73,000 and 50% earned more than 73,000. Total bonuses, which were reported by 27% of those who responded to the survey, were a mean of 4,700 and a median of just over 2,000. So average total compensation, which includes salary plus the bonus, was just over 79,000 with a median of 73,000. So since 2022, current salary and wage income increased by almost 2,700 or 3.6%, while the median increased by just over $2,000 or 3%. Total compensation was flatter, and we take into account there that it seems that bonuses have changed over time, even though some of the data is a little wonky there in terms of how increases in bonuses have happened. However, we think it's a little more targeted in that. Data from consultants reported an average salary from their business that's a mean of almost 64,000 and a median of 61,000. So total mean earnings from the consulting business were slightly higher, but the median was only 40,000. So what this means is there's a substantial variance in consulting earnings based on the amount of time spent and the mix of roles represented here, especially in terms of talking about full-time consultants versus part-time consultants. So if we had the cohort of part-time consultants does bring that dollar amount down, especially part-time consultants without other employment. I mentioned earlier about those job titles, and included in the survey, we also had some data for some other positions. So you can see the average salaries by position for grant, and this is across the entire survey. And this is the point where I really encourage you to dig deeper or look at the detailed tables that are in the actual salary report, because there you will get a better picture, provided there's enough data from the area, either by region, the size of employer, and a number of other factors where we've done those tables out so you can see a little more detailed information. But in terms of the overall salary information, this gives you a picture of where things are overall for the various job titles, including not only the specific grant titles that I mentioned earlier, but somebody was asking about like director of development or a development manager. In some cases, even presidents and CEOs of smaller organizations that responded to our survey. So you can see where those categories fall in, especially as we get down towards the bottom of that list in those cases. But again, for specific details, I encourage you to download the report, and we'll give you the links for that as well if you're a GPA member. So one other thing just to note, so because we have such a wide range of professional positions, the organization that we use to help us do this survey also looks at compensation figures from professionals in other areas. So for example, the major gifts and grants officers, they look at salary data from other organizations as well to see if our data is in alignment with that. Especially like the C-suite, the vice president positions or executive director positions. So how does that compare over time? Well, over the past 17 years, mean salary reported in this survey has increased by over $22,000 or less than 40%. If you look at that over a 17-year period, this is roughly a 2% compounded annual increase. There are 2 years, and you can pretty easily see them in the data here. 2 years, 2015 and 2020, that showed a 6% and 11% increases. But there have been many years showing more modest increases. The one thing that I will say, basically since 2019 going forward, we've seen more consistency in the increases year over year from around a 4 to 6% increase year over year. Now, the next question that relates specifically in terms of how grant professionals are paid goes to the question of whether you're exempt from overtime pay or are paid an hourly salary based on the definitions from the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor just recently posted some new information about the qualifications for exempt versus non-exempt, but most survey participants are exempt from overtime pay. So that's about 80%, while 20% are non-exempt. So those might be some of the folks that are part-time as well. Although the majority remains as a salaried position, 20% are paid on an hourly basis. And then this year we did add the being paid on a flat rate per project basis. So both of those factors impacted the 9-point reduction in those paid by a salary since 2022. I mentioned before that about 11% of the respondents had the GPC certification. And one of the things that we asked in the survey is what was the impact of the GPC credential on your salary? And you can see from the chart here that 46% felt it increased their opportunity for salary increases, and about 54% felt it was the same. In terms of why people pursue the why people don't pursue the GPC, a couple information there was the two largest categories are people felt they didn't need it or it was cost prohibitive. The other category kind of comes to a whole list of stuff. And this information is shared with the Grant Professional Certification Institute as well. Again, this is the estimated increase in salaries based on having the credential. So individuals are split almost evenly, again, as before, about how much impact it has on their salary. But this is just gives you some information about what people perceive as their increase in salary from having the GPC. So how much do grant consultants make? So the data from the consultants reporting an average salary of their business that is a mean of over 63,000, almost 64,000, and a median of around 61,000. What's the impact, or what's the effect of being a consultant? So we mentioned before that there were some people thinking about becoming a consultant. So most consultants report having a full-time job prior to becoming a consultant. And so while 13% reported they did not have a prior full-time job. So slight majority report that their net income is higher than it was as an employee. 24% report that it's about the same, and 22% report that it's less. The positive impact consultants report that this career choice had a significant impact on their earnings. So those that indicated their earnings are more indicated a mean of 65% and a median of 40% increase in earnings. That's almost identical to the results that we had in 2022. One of the things in terms of those who indicated their consulting was less, it's consistent with, and the sheer size of the latter figures indicate the risk that is involved in starting a consulting business. So in terms of, we talked about this earlier, in terms of people in their role and what they wanted in the future, the part that I want to draw your attention here to is for a figure that we're almost reluctant to share this year, but consultants indicate that they put a mean of almost 80% of their income back into the company to grow and sustain it. While the 10% median figure is consistent with 2022 and twice the amount reported in 2021, there was a substantial number who reported putting all of their income back into their company last year. So as a consultant, there's a lot of consultants that are putting a lot of money back into their organization to continue to grow and enhance their organization. Pause here for a minute and answer some questions.
There's a question in the Q&A that says, is this US based only, or does it include Canadian GPA chapter?
I would have to look in the data, but it's primarily US, and we'll see that in a slide later on. I don't recall any Canadian data in this data set, but I would have to go back and look at the final data. I know we had some, but I don't think we have enough. There's some rules around how we can report that data. So I don't think there was enough Canadian participation to be able to report it as Canadian data. Well, I will continue on then with benefits, and we'll make sure to catch your questions as we go through it. We've got an opportunity for more questions at the end. So what kind of insurance are provided by organizations? So most respondents indicated that they can receive all 6 forms of insurance listed in the survey. Although 18% indicated none of them, this percentage was only 6% among full-time employees. It was larger among the part-time and consultants. So 60% of part-time employees responded that these benefits were not available to them, and 72% of consultants responded that their organization or the consulting firm did not provide these. The most common insurance programs are obviously health insurance, dental, vision, and life insurance, while 59% can receive short-term disability insurance, and 56% can receive long-term disability. Those statistics or those percentages are very consistent with 2022. So when you look at full-time employees, those proportions increase. So for full-time employees, 93% of them have insurance provided for health insurance, 89% for dental, 85% for vision, 82% for life insurance, and in the high 60% for long and short-term disability for full-time employees. In terms of other insurance provided, we kind of end up with a long list here. I know for some organizations, they've moved from full-time health insurance to a flexible spending account, HSA, or supplementing the insurance with a flexible spending account, health savings account model. Additional life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment is also a common coverage. Supplemental insurance, or AFLAC, is included as well. So other than the 3-point decrease in the supplemental and a 2-point increase in legal, there are only small changes in 2022 from 2022 to 2023 in this category. In terms of the proportion of monthly premium paid for insurance, you can see the numbers here. I think the interesting pattern here is the proportion of cost of insurance paid by the employer. So most respondents indicated their health, dental, and vision insurance are either fully covered, reported by about 32%, or partially covered for the employee, which is 39 to 40% for each form of insurance. Another 20 to 21% indicate partial coverage for the family, and 12 to 13% indicate partial for the employee plus one. Full coverage for the family or the employee plus one is relatively rare, at 7% and 4%. The one exception there is long-term disability, which is more likely to be covered for the full coverage for the employee, and almost as often partial for the employee only. Another 28% report some coverage, either for full or partial, for the employee plus one. Other benefits that are offered by the employer. So 69% report an a retirement plan. Of note, there 78% of full-time employees report that their employer provide a retirement plan, compared to only 41% for part-time and 19% for the consultants. Obviously, a flexible work schedule remains very popular, reported by 66% of all respondents. Obviously, as grant professionals, I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits and probably most important pieces for you in terms of your work. The majority also report being offered training, general training, workshop, professional membership dues. Telecommuting remains a strong benefit, as well as conferences and webinars. So the entire professional development category, as you go down, including professional memberships and tuition reimbursement, professional development remains to be a strong benefit that are provided. The benefits that are declining slightly in prevalence do include telecommuting and flexible schedules. We do know that, and we do this not just from the grants professionals, but from across all industries. There's been some pushback in terms of telecommuting and flexible schedules, but I think it's one of the things that for grant professionals, it continues to be an important element in their work environments. In terms of paid time off, days received annually. So grant professionals report receiving a mean of 29 total days of leave, including a mean of 16 days of vacation and 11 days of sick leave. Or for those with a PTO system, a mean of 17 days of paid time off. Personal time is a mean of 5.2, while the medians are slightly lower for most forms of leave due to means reflecting some outliers with more general leave benefits. All the specific types of leave reflect only those who receive those forms of leave. So the total doesn't always add up to the actual total. In terms of comparison from 2022, PTO, vacation, and sick leave decreased only slightly, while total leave remained unchanged. So not much movement there. So again, you can see how have benefits changed in the past year. Really, in terms of that, not much has changed. 81% say they basically have remained the same. A few have increased their benefits, and a small group had said they had a decrease in benefits. So before I leave the benefits section, Erin, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, we did have a question come through the Q&A that asked, does this break down by region or state? Because the cost of living is different depending on where you live, and compensation usually reflects this.
Absolutely. And so that's one of the reasons I strongly suggest if you're a GPA member, download the report. If you're not a GPA member and didn't participate, the report is available for you to purchase. And it does have regional breakdowns in it. And if we had enough data from the states, and I'll show you that here in a few slides, for a few of the states that we do have enough data for the state, you can see that by state as well. You can see compensation by the state. So let's talk a little bit about the profile. And this is where we'll talk a little bit more about the data and what the profile of those who responded to the survey, and kind of get to that question about regional responses. So in terms of the types of organizations that people work for, one of the things that we know at GPA is that folks that are members of GPA work for all types of organizations. But the largest group is nonprofit agencies. So you can see that in terms of the reporting here was 26% of the respondents work at a nonprofit agency, 14% reporting from consulting firms. So then after that, we talk about working in government, state and local government, higher education, healthcare, K-12 and community colleges. So you can see there's a lot of education, hospital and healthcare fall into that as well. So I realize that there's kind of gets some a little slicing and dicing between nonprofit agency and advocacy and et cetera. But just so you know that we talk about that in terms of understanding where the data is coming from for those who provided those. Sources of proposed grant proposals written and managed. So in terms of what people do. This kind of reflects back to what people do. Governments comprise just over half of the funding opportunities, and that does include federal, state, and local governments over the past 12 months. The average share of proposals written is largest for local foundations, followed by federal agencies, state governments, national foundations, corporations, and local governments. The share of managed proposals varies only slightly at about 2 percentage points, where state government and corporation funding are slightly lower compared to 2022. I think it will be interesting when we do the survey this year. I have a feeling the government numbers are going to increase as we've seen several federal programs put in place that have state pass-through monies that are coming through for whether it's the Infrastructure Act, some of the ARPA funds and things like that, that are coming through as federal government grants coming through states and municipalities. So it'll be interesting to watch and see if this trend changes much. It hasn't changed a whole lot in the last few years, but again, remaining that a lot of folks are split in terms of foundation versus government grants. In terms of the size of the organization, this is clearly one of those cases where the average and the median show a stark difference. So the overall organizational budget had a mean overall budget of 208 million and a median of 21 million. So you can see the range of size of organizations that participated in the survey. They reported a mean of 43 million and a median of 3.2 million in total grant awards. The huge variances between mean and median occur each year. Again, somewhat actually accentuated by the larger organizations also having multiple survey participants. In terms of budget, you can see the mean organization budget is much smaller and mean grant awards are much higher than in 2022. But we use this data for categorizing compensation levels as it's a more meaningful indicator of change. So in terms of size of organization, how big is the organization? Similar to the revenue statistics, respondents report a very high median of total full-time equivalent personnel, just over 1,000, compared with sorry, I said median, I meant mean. A mean of full-time personnel of around 1,100 compared to a median of 69. The latter is an increase of more than 15% over 2022. So more consistent figures are reported for total full-time equivalent staff employed in the grants function department. So that's the full-time equivalents in grants of 7 and a median of 2. So among the 37% who report supervisory responsibility, they have a mean of 4 reports and a median of 2 direct reports. So going back one step there, the full-time employees employed in the grant department function, obviously with a median of 2, that means the vast majority of our folks work in a small grants shop in terms of they've got 2 or fewer people working in their shop. In terms of experience and age, so we do gather this data. So the overall profile of the average survey participant shows a mean of 46.9 years of age, 12 years in the grants field, and 6.2 years in their current organization, or 9 years in their consulting firm, if applicable. So by inference, the average grant professional entered the field at a mean age of almost 35 years. That kind of fits with a lot of the anecdotes we hear in terms of people finding their way into the grants profession, and not not been intentional in that coming out of school or in other ways. Apparently, employment stability has decreased recently as the mean years with their current organization has decreased by 1.3 years since 2022. And the ratio of this tenure to total years in the field dropped to 52% from almost 60% in 2022. In contrast, the mean years in their consulting firm increased by 1.8 years. So this may reflect a decrease in respondents who are part-time consultants trying out the field, moving back to a full-time position, as we talked about earlier. So here is that information I shared about geographic location. Um, so we do use the census regions to break things out. And so the most common states reporting were California, Texas, Ohio, Florida, and Arizona. As far as the breakdown in terms of the census regions, 35% were from the South, 27% in the Midwest, 25% in the West, and 13% reporting from the Northeast. This continues a slight shift to the West, but it reverses a shift to the South, while participation in the Midwest group increased a little bit this year. And again, this is data when you get into the actual report itself, there's data by region where applicable. And again, the international slice there shows 0%. So as I recall, there is some international data, but again, it's not enough for us to be able to report on as a total. In terms of where individuals work, a slight majority work in urban areas, with 31% in suburban areas and 15% in rural areas. This represents a small shift toward urban and rural and away from suburban since 2022. Again, small shifts there, but we continue to watch that to see if it's going to become a trend. In terms of career level, and this is self-reported career level, shows that almost half of participants in the survey regard themselves as advanced practitioners, with slightly fewer mid-career and just 16% who stated they were early in their career. So it shows a small shift of about 1% from advanced to early career professionals since 2022. We do know, again, anecdotally, that, and we hear this in other industries as well, that people are starting to retire. So some of our advanced practitioners are beginning to retire. And so we'll probably have some more early career folks participating in our surveys. In terms of educational level, this is one smart group of folks. I think you probably already knew that ahead of time, but the majority of respondents have attended a graduate school, with 49% having a master's degree and 8% of our group having a doctorate or equivalent, and 8% having some graduate school without earning a degree. Another 29% hold a bachelor's degree or have an associate's degree in some college. So this year, the doctorate level increased by 2%, and the master's degree folks decreased by 5%. I don't know what to read into that necessarily, but other than to say, again, grant professionals are a really brilliant group of folks. I'm maybe a little biased on that. The vast majority of background in terms of where people come from and what is their study in terms of majority of their studies, you can see are in humanities and the arts, and social sciences are the two largest categories. Fewer report holding degrees in business or communication and journalism, while nonprofit or public administration, science and engineering, and education are even less common. And so we continue to monitor this trend to see if there's anything that we can do to identify trends in that area as well. In terms of gender, the large majority of grant professionals reporting to our survey are female, with 15% male and 1% non-binary. Essentially, this data is unchanged from 2022. And then you can see the breakdown in terms of brackets of age here, in terms of this 88% are in their 20s, 22% in their 30s, 26% in their 40s, 28% in their 50s, and 16% in their 60s. So again, the good news for us is that we seem to be well distributed across the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but we will continue to watch that in terms of workforce development and finding the future grant professionals to help support the field. So with that, I will open it back up to questions. And Erin, let me know what questions we have or comments.
Okay. And I think this probably was on a previous slide, but why don't you have a nonprofit social services category?
So this is one of those slides that we've struggled with, or categories we've struggled with over the years. For consistency over the years, we've decided to leave the categories the same. and that's probably something we need to take a look at, and just at some point make a change and look at better defining the nonprofit agency, because we've got several subcategories of it listed, and I think that this is probably the time to take a look at that to make that more clear for folks.
Okay, another question is, are there survey statistics focusing on or reflecting data submitted by those working mainly with small nonprofits?
There would be data for small nonprofits, but not necessarily if you're looking at the consultant data. I'm not sure that that data is going to be there, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Okay, and then another question, could you remind us again of the total number of respondents?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't have the total number on this in this slide deck. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was over 2,000 was the total respondents.
And that is all the questions I have right now. If you guys have more questions, please place them in the Q&A or the chat. I can read them from either.
If there are any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. But just as a reminder, some additional resources for GPA members, the full 2023 report with the detailed charts and graphs are available to members to download. Also, we have available to you prior year's compensation surveys. So if you want to look back for a couple of years and say, how have things gone in my region or area for the last couple of years? The last couple of years have the detailed charts in them. The older surveys don't have as much data in them, so they're a little bit, they don't have the detailed charts in them, but you can certainly look for some trends there. The other report, and because part of what we reported on here was in terms of grant proposals funded and managed, the State of Grant Seeking report, which is produced by Grant Station, and we're a sponsor of that report, does a more in-depth job looking at the state of grant seeking, especially the number of proposals written and funded and where the funding comes from and size of proposal and length of proposal, et cetera. And then obviously we, with GPA, we're a big proponent of the GPA Code of Ethics. And in terms of compensation for grant professionals, we believe grant professionals should be paid for their work, but not from a percentage of the grant. So that's another resource as well. And a point to Grant Zone also is a resource for you, especially for those who might be considering making the leap into consulting. We have a great consultants community in Grant Zone. The one caveat that I will tell you, and it's the thing that if it ever comes up in the discussion, we have to tell people not to have that discussion, is about pricing of services. But you can certainly use the data in the salary survey to help you understand what the market is for various consulting services.
It's not a question, but I had a wonderful comment saying, thank you so much. As a newbie to GPA focusing on grant consulting to supplement retirement, I appreciate getting this info.
Well, thank you. That's part of why we do it. We want to make sure that grant professionals are fully informed and can advocate for themselves. And that's one of the things that we know in the past, people have been able to take this survey data and take it to their organization and show them, again, independent survey data that reflects for their region, for their size and type of organization, what the average salaries are. And that's part of the reason we do this, is to be able to provide you that information so you can advocate for yourselves as a grant professional.
A question just came through. Do you collect and share max and mins for salary?
I don't believe that we have max and mins in I think there might be in some of the detailed report. I'd have to go back and look at some of the charts in the detailed report, but I think within those charts, it has averages, but I think it also have, I'd have to go back and look at the data for sure, but I believe some of those have maximums in them, maximums and minimums.
And someone did find that on the summary of the report, it says 2,305 respondents.
Okay. I knew it was over 2,000. I couldn't remember how many over 2,000 it was.
Well, if we are all done with questions, I just want to thank Mike for today's presentation. presentation, and thank you all for being here today. Full report will be made available again to members, and then the summary report will be sent to the non-members. And again, like Mike said, you can purchase the full report, and we can send a link on how to do that when we send the recording. It will also be put in grant school within the next week or so. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me and I will get them directed to where they need to be. But we really do appreciate you being here today.
Again, thank you all for being here. And again, feel free to let us know if you've got questions or ways we can make the survey better to help you as a grant professional.